Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Lunch and Learn Legal Advice for Indie Filmmakers. I'm Megan Ross, Seed&Spark's Head of Creator Success. Before we kick off the event, we'd first like to acknowledge the land we are all on is occupied territory. Please check the YouTube live comments feed for a link to a First Nations COVID relief fund and an amazing app that will tell you exactly whose land you are currently watching from, or in the video description if you're watching this as a VOD. I am coming to you from the land originally belonging to Jamanos, Tonkawa, Coahuitecan, and Comanche. And if you're not familiar with Seed&Spark, we are a platform built to support creators by providing tools for wherever you are in your journey, from crowdfunding and education to creative distribution approaches. So let's bring on our guest experts for today's panel. Our first guest is Stacey A. Davis, an award-winning filmmaker and an entertainment lawyer at the law firm of Stacey A. Davis, and various producer roles. Her films, which have appeared at Sundance, South by Southwest, and have been featured in The New Yorker, include Jockey, Swan Song, Sword of Trust, Little Sister in 1985. She made her directorial debut in 2019 with her dramedy short, Cherry, and her short documentary, Pie and the Puss, A Brief History of Pieing in Film, which sounds hilarious. As an entertainment lawyer, she's represented A24, Plan B Entertainment, Tadmore Entertainment, and others on a variety of projects, including Minari, Death of Dick Long, I Can Only Imagine, Summer '03, and Only. Davis also sits on the board of Stowe Story Labs. Thank you so much, Stacey, for joining us.
Thank you.
And our next guest is Erica Conchola. In her leadership of production legal for such breakout works as the 2021 Sundance film Wild Indian and 2020 festival films Four Good Days, Arkansas, and Happily, as well as 2019 Golden Globe winner The Americans and Skydance's Grace and Frankie and Foundation, partner Erica Conchola optimizes her clients' financial, legal, and business position in the financing, production, and exploitation of their content. Erica serves as outside production counsel for Skydance Television and is currently advising several producers of short and long form content slated for the theatrical, television, and new media platforms. Please welcome Erica.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us. Well, thank you both for joining us. As I was saying before, I think entertainment lawyers are roles that a lot of indie filmmakers starting out don't realize the importance of until you get screwed over by contracts or get into like arguments with labels when it comes to music licensing. But I want to know, taking it far back to when you started your careers, what drew you to the field of entertainment law?
Stacey, do you want to start first?
Sure. So in undergrad, I was studying business and just had this notion that I was going to go on and do something in the business field. And like most seniors, or some seniors anyway, in college, I realized that I was not at all equipped to be out in the real world yet, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do. So law school seemed like a reasonable idea. So I went to law school thinking that I was going to be a business attorney and just kind of practice business transactional law. And then I started practicing, and I've always been interested in the arts and always been interested in film. When I started practicing, I also began volunteering for a local film festival, the Sidewalk Film Festival here in Birmingham, and began meeting just a lot of filmmakers and people who were in the industry. And one of the things that, you know, when you're a lawyer, it's kind of like if you're a doctor. It doesn't matter what kind of medicine you practice, somebody's going to ask you a medical question. You could be a podiatrist, but they're going to ask you about their tooth. So I was getting a lot of entertainment law questions, and I didn't have the answers to them, but I was really intrigued by the subject matter. So it was a lot of fake it till you make it, and just researching and sort of learning as you go. And that started snowballing, and now, you know, 20 years later, that's what I do full time. So it wasn't something that I set out to do, but it was something that I was kind of interested in, and very, very glad that I've landed here to do it.
That's awesome. And Erica, how about you? What drew you to that, the role you're in today?
Well, I always wanted to be a lawyer since I was a kid, since like my parents will say since age 7, I always said I wanted to be a lawyer. So that was always the goal. Going into college, I always knew I was going to eventually take the LSATs, go to law school. It was just a matter of like where. I didn't know about entertainment law until I actually was probably a senior in college or even starting out. in law school, I always, you just see the ones you see on television, which is like the defense and prosecution and like trial lawyers. So I always thought like that was where I was going to end up. I took psychology, I majored in psychology in college, thinking like that would be a great background for something along those lines. But then I always loved film and television. I, went to any film that we saw. I was up to speed on the new shows and who was who. And so when I discovered that there's these nuances in the law and that I can merge my love of film and television with the career path that I chose, I just went to everything and anything that I could, taking classes that associated with any form of, IP content that I could. I mean, I went to BU, so there wasn't a lot in Boston. There wasn't a lot of classes associated with that, but, found an entertainment attorney who worked out of her house near Boston, near BU, and so worked for her for one of the semesters, and then took internships that were in line with that, and eventually landed with the internship at the firm I'm now and have been there ever since. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's very cool. Can I ask, is the reason your family always knew that you were going to be a lawyer is because you're good at arguing? Because that's the reason my family would give me, is like they wanted to push me towards law because they're like, you're so good at arguing.
Yeah, I mean, that's stubborn, determined. Yeah. Yeah, that was part of it.
That's great. So what kind of steps would you say an indie filmmaker or screenwriter take to protect themselves from legal issues when they're starting out, particularly like do not get sued on your first short film?
Erica, you want to go first? Or you want me to kick off?
Yeah, I can go first. So, I mean, a lot of it is, protect the content, like have the content, if it's yours, copyrighted. If it's somebody else's, get that in writing, what the ownerships are. I'm a big proponent of having things in writing, and if you have partners, making sure the expectation in that partnership is somehow in writing, so everybody is aware of what that relationship is. We like to call it like a prenup amongst your partners, just having something in writing, even if it's simple, just so that everybody knows their roles and everybody knows like what their stake in the game is and what happens if the marriage falls apart. Everybody goes in this with bright eyes and high hopes, but sometimes that doesn't work out, and you want to make sure that you have some plan in line if it doesn't. And it's not to say it won't. It's the same thing like going into marriage with the prenup. It's just covering your bases when you're starting out. So that's my start out advice.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think chain of title is a word that probably sounds mysterious and scary to a lot of people starting out, but once you really understand what it is and how you go about getting a clear chain of title, it's really not that hard at all, and it is really the foundation for your project and super important to pay attention to. And I completely agree with Erica about the prenup analogy. I find a lot of early indie filmmakers are kind of scared to put things down on paper, like, oh, well, we have a handshake deal, we talked about it, and that in and of itself gives them enough comfort. So a lot of what I do in those early stages is just kind of educating people to let them know, the downside of not having something on paper and all the eventualities, the negative eventualities that could come to pass without putting something down, and how it's great that you guys have been friends for 10 years and it's great that you have this trust together. But I am a huge believer that, good fences make good neighbors and good contracts make good relationships. So there shouldn't be anything inherently scary about putting something on paper. In fact, for me, I think it's kind of a red flag. If there's a party out there who's not wanting to solidify something or not put into writing what they say they're going to do, then that should really make you kind of think twice and be like, well, what are they thinking that they're not willing to put it on paper?
Yeah, I can speak from personal experience. I think like setting those boundaries, and like clearly defining like what that partnership looks like. And even when you're like setting rates when you're hiring crew, because this happened to me where I agreed to a rate on the phone and then assumed that it was in the email thread. And when you go back and it's that rate isn't in there, and then all of a sudden you're backpedaling and making assumptions. What would you say is one mistake you've seen emerging filmmakers who aren't working with an entertainment lawyer make?
You want me to take this one first?
Sure.
Okay. I think it's probably a lack of understanding about the full nature of a contract. So many times people will, talk about the high level things. What's the credit? What's the compensation? And feel like if they have, kind of those two things down, then they have a deal. And they think that they can get by with a really sort of simple short form and, just outline those few key terms and move on. But what I feel like, if you haven't been through the entire process, meaning you haven't been through all the way through distribution, and you have a distributor who wants to acquire your work, and you haven't seen the list of legal deliverables and see what they require, I think you'd be surprised at the end of the day how that super short form, just getting down the basic credit and comp, can hurt you. Because the distributor, they don't really care what you paid the director at the end of the day, right? They don't care if that director's getting paid ads or not, to the extent, I mean, you have to let them know. But what they care about is there a limitation of liability provision in there? Is there an assignment provision in there? Is there a merger and integration clause in there? So a lot of times I think filmmakers don't appreciate the boilerplate to the extent that that they should, considering how impactful and important it is down the road. But really, that's just having conversations with your lawyers and going through and understanding the process and, what's kind of going to be required, not just on the front end, but on the back end when you're trying to deliver that film.
Yeah. Yeah. Thinking about like the entire length of that film, like where it's going to live from the very beginning to end. Because I think first time filmmakers are so worried about just like making it to set, getting the funding, that they're not even thinking of like what happens when this is ready to share with the world, and what does that mean to everyone involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
Erica, what would you say is a mistake you often see?
Similar to what Stacy said, but also just not getting anything in writing. Sometimes it's people don't realize that everybody, crew, PAs have to have signed something, because you have to think with the eyes of, we're going to have to deliver this to somebody who's going to want to see all the contracts, all the bells and whistles that they're going to need in order to feel the comfort of letting it, exploiting this to the world. And it is those boilerplate, that those terms and conditions that, we tack on to those short forms and have to go back, because a lot of the time you're going to have to chase and find where those people were. And we've definitely been in that situation where we've had filmmakers come to us and like, we got a distribution deal, like this is great. And then, we have to like prepare drafts for them to actually go back and try to find all these people to sign. And it ends up being more costly at the end of the day, because the time it takes to try to track these people down, and also to have to look at everything and prepare what they're missing versus starting from the start and having everything in order, ends up being almost twice the cost at the end of the day.
I think that there's a good rule of thumb for indie filmmakers out there who may be working on their first or second film, is just to remember, anyone who's appearing in front of the camera or anyone who's working behind the camera, paid or unpaid, needs to sign some type of agreement at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's huge. I think people can get really casual when they get to set, because they're like, oh, I just had some friends last minute come on as a PA. I texted them. But as a producer, it's like you really need to have that. Everyone, like, also like for insurance reasons, like people need to sign those crew deal memos.
And it's true for the short stuff, like short films, excuse me, or even ones that you're thinking, oh, this is never going to be commercially released. That's fine, but you still need to own everything, right? You still need to own that content and have everybody who contributed to that sign something saying so, because you don't know what you're going to do with it. You may end up distributing it, whether it's self-distribution or not, or you may end up, using that as the backbone for something bigger, and you want to make sure that then that becomes part of your chain of title. We're going back to like that concept that is now part of your IP that you need to deliver and show that you have ownership. So you just never know what you're going to end up doing with your smaller projects as well.
Yeah, better safe than sorry, definitely. So let's go to the pre-production phase, and you can take whatever component about this question you want to answer, but how do you typically interact with film crew members during pre-pro, such as when it comes to financing, talent contracts, or location releases?
Erica, you want to start this
Yeah,
one?
I'll start. So my point person generally is either the lead producer who hires me or the line producer who's going to deal with the day-to-day contracts on set. So or both. Sometimes it ends up being both people. So we coordinate what their needs are. So when I'm engaged, we set a scope of what I'm going to be doing versus what they're going to be doing, because a lot of the time they're the ones handling like the day-to-day crew or the daily, weekly players, and I'm handling more of the main cast or the producers, the high-level producers and directors. So we delineate what that scope is. I give them what they need, and then they'll give me terms of the deal points that I need to draft, and we coordinate that paperwork. So during pre-production, we focus on those bigger play, getting cast in line, making sure their chain of titles all set up, director deal, anybody that is going to start, and I give them the forms for the crew. If I need to have eyes on that, then we deal with that. But it's more just getting the paperwork in order so that they can start come production day. And the unions, and dealing with unions as well.
Yeah, which I've heard is a lot of paperwork, especially indie filmmakers who hire SAG. Stacey, any other components that you want to highlight around financing, contracts, releases that Erica didn't answer?
Yeah, no, I have a very similar process. It's outlining the scope, it's outlining who's going to be doing what, and making sure, if you have multiple producers on a project, it's good to designate someone as sort of the lead contact with the attorney, because what you don't want to have happen is the attorney prepare sort of a draft of something, send it out, and then they're waiting on 4 different producers to say okay to something, So I always find it really helpful to have a lead producer who I'm sort of interfacing with, and you might CC everybody to keep everybody in the loop, but having that designated person who's going to liaise with the lawyer is super helpful. And then much like Erica, generally I'm handling the above the line, the HOD deals, and then I'll prepare a production packet, which will have a lot of form agreements that the UPM or line producers can work through for the lower level talent and crew, et cetera. And like Erica said, if something needs to be negotiated, or you need eyes on something, you can always hop in, but you're sort of pursuing parallel paths at that point. And the producer, boots on the ground producer team is handling a lot of that other paperwork.
Gotcha. And we're going to answer questions later. We're getting a lot of great questions, but I do want to pull up one from Shannon Harris, who asked to define chain of title, since that's coming up frequently in the answers. Can one of you speak to what chain of title means?
Yeah, Stacey, sure. So just in a very general sense, chain of title is, every single document that put together is going to show that ownership is vested 100% in the production company or the filmmaker, whoever ultimately is signing on to the contract. Generally, it's going to be a single purpose LLC, that the production company, particularly in indie filmmaking. So that means that entity is entering all of the guild agreements, that entity is entering into all of the cast and crew agreements, that entity is the one who is going, when you file a copyright registration for the screenplay, they're going to be the ones who are the copyright claimant. So it's basically a collection of documents that show that ownership is vested in one person or entity, and therefore they have the rights to control that project. So they're going to be the ones entering into the distribution agreement, et cetera. What happens when you don't have a clear chain of title is you don't have all of those pieces of the puzzle, right? You don't have a copyright registration yet. You don't have a signed agreement with the director, and therefore, ownership and rights can be in question. So it's only when you have that full and complete chain of title do you know that 100% the project is owned and vested in that production company. And that's what the distributor is going to be looking for at the end of the day. Not only do you have to make a representation in the distribution agreement itself that says there's clear chain of title and that you have all these documents and agreements, but you actually have to physically deliver them to the distributor to prove that. So it's really just the foundation of everything that you're doing as a filmmaker, whether it's independent $50,000 film to, you know, a multi-million-dollar studio picture. Chain of title is key. Erica, did I leave anything out of there? Probably.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, to add to like other things they have to do for a chain of title is you also, you know, have to file with the Copyright Office. So not only the screenplay, but the documentation itself, like the assignments between companies, if that's the case, or the certificate of authorship, if with your writer, you would file those documents with the Copyright Office as well, and the distributor will want to see that, and the unions also want to see that. SAG requires clean chain of title to their signatory as well, because SAG also takes security interests against the picture.
Yeah, I recently went through the U.S. copyright website. It's very archaic, very old school government website, but that's encouraged a lot of times, especially with even before you make the project, when you're just submitting the script to competitions. So let's.
You know, and actually, can I add one caveat to that, since you both brought up the Copyright Office, is I think something that's misunderstood with a lot of writers who are coming up, and even filmmakers, they will say, well, I registered my script with the WGA. That's fine. That is not a substitute for a copyright registration. That is not a substitute for registering it with the United States Copyright Office. As you mentioned, there is a website. It's you know, you can go to copyright.gov and you can fill out a few forms, upload your script, pay $55 or $35 or whatever it is now.
I think it's 65 now.
65 now. Jeez.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then get that registration going. So I would advise writers who, you know, you don't have to register with the WGA. That's an extra step if you want to do it, but it's not necessary. Just go straight to the copyright.gov and register the work. And then should the screenplay, you know, be purchased or whatever later on, there'll be an assignment. You record the assignment and chain of title will go on. But I see a lot of filmmakers who say to me, well, I registered with the WGA as if that means something. And it doesn't. So,
it's not a public record, the WGA registration.
Yeah.
I can't search their website and find the registration on the WGA. When you can do that, the whole point of the copyright is that it's public notice. It's telling everybody, the world, that you have copyright in your script.
Gotcha.
And it vests certain legal rights that you don't have without a registration. You have common law copyright rights to the work, but you don't have statutory rights. That only comes with the copyright registration.
So yeah, it is worth going through the many steps that they put you through on that archaic website for that safety. So let's move into the post-production. The film is finished, and now we're dealing with artwork releases or music licensing. What is your role during that stage? And we can get into distribution as well, because that's my next question, like your role between post and distribution.
Well, ideally, art releases should have been obtained during production, not post. That's the kind of stuff you shouldn't. Material releases, artwork releases, those type of things that are being filmed in real time, you should get prior to, because if you don't get them at the end of the day, it's going to be harder to go back and try to edit them out or get a fair use letter. If it's fair use, it might not be. Artwork is actually, I think, one of the more litigious clearance issues. So
it's the reason why we go and turn all the spices around in the kitchen, or like if there's like a McDonald's it's like all those little things you do as a producer to make sure what in this frame can get me sued.
Right. So clearance should happen as you're filming prior to, really. Like whatever you're going to show, make sure you have a release prior to actually showing it, or else don't show it. Use generic, take out labels, don't use that artwork. If you don't know where the artwork came from, if you found it in the flea market and you think it looks cool, don't use it.
And that goes for tattoos too, which I learned. An agency I worked at got in trouble because they didn't have clearance on a tattoo artwork that someone was a cast member was wearing.
There's various schools of thought of how conservative versus how not conservative you are with tattoos. My thought in tattoos is if it's a distinctive like tattoo, very creative. It almost could be like artwork versus, like a barbed wire or something generic, then you should get clearance. if you're going to obviously recreate a tattoo, then definitely get clearance. I think we learned that all from the issues that Warner Brother had with the Mike Tyson tattoo that they recreated.
Oh, yeah.
That was one of the issues, is that they recreated an artist's tattoo.
Gotcha.
So that's something you don't want to do. If you see an artwork that you're like, that's cool, but I can't actually get it cleared, you also can't recreate it. You have to create something new.
Yeah.
But going back to your other question on post, music licenses, we deal with that. It really just depends on the scope of our services. Usually we give music license forms as part of our form packet. A lot of companies will have their own music licenses. Like if you go to bigger companies, they're gonna provide you with their pretty template form. They don't necessarily negotiate those out completely. Those are what they are. If you go to like a big, Sony Music, those are the forms they're going to give you. But smaller indie like bands will sign our forms, which will have all the boilerplate language and all the rights that you need. But usually we don't negotiate quotes. I don't know if Stacy, you do, but we don't handle like obtaining quotes or getting the quotes. We handle like the paperwork once the deal is made. A lot of our, even our smaller projects have music supervisors who are also, in like, there's indie supervisors who may, be wanting to get their feet wet. And so they'll come in and get those quotes and advise on the music and the posts.
Gotcha. Yeah, Stacey, any other elements? Oh, so go for it.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I echo everything Erica said with respect to the, art releases and things like that. And no, I don't go get quotes and do that. I'll do the papering at the end, but otherwise I fear, half my day would be doing that kind of work, and that's best suited for a music supervisor, or even a producer who's, DIYing it as much as they can. They should be sending out those emails and getting that information. But it is absolutely something that I think should be happening in post. I think it is dangerous, and we could probably have an hour conversation about this alone, but putting in a bunch of really popular music and, trying to get away with that on the festival circuit and then going to get licenses later and, all of that. I just think that is a very dangerous road to go down, and don't recommend or advise that for my clients. So absolutely something that I think should happen in post.
Yeah. I think that was like a plot point in the Amazon show I Love Dick, where Catherine Hahn's character never got the approval for the song in her film, and like she was like blacklisted from festivals and the industry, and like I feel like that like haunted me. I'm like, always get that approval from the artist. Yeah, you can't just drop in like a Britney Spears song into your indie film and think that's okay.
Right.
So how should a filmmaker or screenwriter prepare for a meeting with an entertainment lawyer? What would be the best way to approach a lawyer and be prepared for that interaction, that relationship?
I mean, I think the good news is it's not like you're, meeting with a production or somebody where you feel like you have to prepare a pitch, because that's, it's completely not necessary at all. So it shouldn't be looked at something that's like scary or daunting or anything like that. But you should come prepared with questions, because, that's why we're there, is to help with questions. So I think, in that sort of initial call to the entertainment lawyer, you're kind of just sussing out, what is it they do? What is it you need? And are you compatible? So when you want to move forward, then I think the next conversations are really drilling down into the details of the project and what your exact legal needs would be, and talking about budget and fees and timelines and all of that. But I have several people who reach out to me who are maybe on the newer side to the industry who, seem really nervous or like scared to talk to an entertainment lawyer. And that's just, I understand that you butterflies or whatever, but we're really just here to be of assistance and to help. And it shouldn't be something where you think your project's going to live or die if this person says yes or no, because that's just not the way lawyers work. Maybe Erica, maybe you're cut through.
No, exactly. That's exactly what it is. It's more of a conversation. I think my first, calls with new clients, it's a conversation of what their project is, when they're planning on film, what they're doing, what I do. I just, I give them pretty much the same conversation of what we do, what we can do for them, what our scopes are, what our fees are, our turnaround time, how we work. Sometimes it's only one attorney, sometimes it's multiple attorneys on a project, depending on the scope of work. So it's a lot of it is sussing out whether, we fit into what they're trying to do, and what their needs are. So it's like Stacey said, it's not scary. It shouldn't be scary, and I hope it's not for the most part. It's having that, another partner on the show with you who can help you.
Yeah, there are enough scary meetings in the industry. The lawyer meeting doesn't have to be that one.
Right.
So what would you say should an independent filmmaker look for when they're seeking out production counsel? And this can also combine with our other question: what skills do you think make a good entertainment lawyer? Because I feel like entertainment lawyers are in this distinct world where you're a lawyer, but you're also dealing with Hollywood personalities. So it's like, what are the kind of best ways to encompass that role?
Yeah, I think it's a little subjective of sort of what somebody's looking for and somebody who's going to service their project, right? The takeaway from some of my clients, I think what they like is communication. Somebody who's going to communicate and let you know what they're doing, how much they're doing, and when they're going to do it, and when they also get responses back. Turnaround time, especially production, is very manic and timely, and things need to be urgent, and whether that's true or not, things are urgent.
It always feels urgent.
The bandwidth of an attorney of, what is their typical turnaround time? There's always going to be certain situations where maybe you don't get back to you within the time frame, but like I communicate why that is. There's certain things like that. Just that feeling of this is the person I want to work with. That there's going to be a subjective level to that when you have a conversation with an attorney, with that first meeting of, yes, I think this person is trustworthy. There's going to be somebody who I can work with. There's that level of we're all friendly. This is the industry of, you work with people you like, and you should like your attorney. Maybe you want an attorney actually who's going to be cutthroat and who's going to be the bulldog. But I think for most of my clients, I become friends with some of my clients, some of my producers who I work very closely, because it becomes a relationship. You end up working with them and talking to them pretty much every day.
Yeah, Stacey, what would you add to that?
No, I completely agree. I think, on the front end, communication, well, not just on the front end, throughout the entire relationship, communication is key. I think if you ask clients in any area of law, I think their number one complaint would be that my lawyer doesn't communicate with me. And I've always taken that to heart. So I always try to be available and accessible, and respectful of the fact that, I'm a member of the team and somebody's relying on me for information or for whatever it is, and get to that in a timely manner, in a helpful manner. Ultimately I see my job as making the producer's job easier, right? So I'm there to take a burden off of their backs and to let them know that something's going to be handled, and it's going to be handled in a timely manner, and it's going to be handled, in a way that they would appreciate. And because of that, I think, I have, as with Erica, I've formed strong relationships with my clients and the producers that I work with. And, if you go to IMDb or whatever, you'll see I tend to work with them over and over again, probably like Erica does, because it's when you're working at that level with someone where you're talking to them every day, to have just that additional layer of friendship or whatever, it just makes the whole experience so much more pleasant. And at the end of the day, this is a job, and we go to work every day, and I want to enjoy my job. I want to enjoy the people that I work with. So I'm going to invest in those relationships, and I appreciate producers who invest in that relationship back.
Yeah, I feel like that's a huge takeaway, because I think indie filmmakers, they hear lawyer and they just assume, like Erica, when you watch TV when you're a kid, and it's like you assume those people in trials, but you don't realize like it's a relationship that you're building as you're venturing towards your first project, or maybe many projects later. And like any other relationship in this industry, it's like there's got to be a mutual respect and communication. Like I feel like you're giving me like couples therapy tips. It's like communication and like liking the person and prenup. but I'll do one more question, then we have a lot of great questions in the chat. Other than word of mouth, what's the best way to find an entertainment lawyer, particularly for indie filmmakers?
I mean, I think word of mouth is the best way. Talk to your fellow filmmakers who have they worked with before that they like, and reach out to those people, and talk to several of them. Don't just necessarily pick up the phone and the first one you talk to is like, oh, the one that I got to take, right? I mean, you can pick up the phone and have 5, 10, 15-minute conversations with several different entertainment lawyers and find out, who do you vibe with? Who do you feel like has capacity at that time? Who do you feel like, is going to match up based on your budget? I mean, there's a lot of different factors that go into picking a lawyer. If there's a client out there who's deciding between, Erica and I, then they're going to have choices. And just because they pick Erica doesn't mean that, I'm a bad lawyer. If they pick me, that Erica's a bad lawyer. There's plenty of great entertainment lawyers out there. So pick the one that's, great and fits for you and your project.
Erica, anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's word of mouth, definitely, for sure. I think that always, I mean, we do that in every day of our life. Like, if I want a contractor, I ask, who has the best contractor. It's the same. It's the same thing. I mean, there's other avenues. You can, go to like the bar associations. I'm sure they have referral lists, and California Lawyers for the Arts has referral lists of attorneys. When we used to go to festivals, you can always meet people at festivals. Our law firm used to always attend the major festivals, and that's where we would take meetings and meet there. So, I mean, I agree with Stacey. I mean, word of mouth and having somebody else have a good experience and is speaks volumes, because again, it's like, then you get a little feel of like how somebody worked with somebody else. You can actually use that. Yeah,
definitely. All right, we've had so many questions come in ever since y'all started talking. I think a lot of us don't come across entertainment lawyers frequently, so thank you for being such a great resource. So let me pull up the first one. So we discussed, someone did ask about writing, collaborating, and we covered that. And that I think is applicable because they asked about a TV pilot and a series show Bible, but we covered that, like getting everything in writing. We'll bring up Jack Smyer's question. Shay, if you're able to pull that on screen. I don't know if I could do that. So Jack's asked, I'd like to know when to break out NDAs when collaborating early in a project, or perhaps interviewing someone about their experiences so you can write authentically, but before hiring that person. So what role does the NDA have? How early should someone be signing it? Either of you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, so I mean, I think NDAs are used in a couple of different ways. So as part of my production package, for example, I'll have an NDA in there, and that NDA will be signed by, the crew who comes on board. So, and that's just kind of expected if you don't have the NDA language in your standard terms and conditions. But specifically to this situation, I mean, I think it really all depends who you're talking to. There are some people out there who are saying, I'm not going to sign an NDA, no way, no how, never, right, on the other side. And then there are some, people in the indie film space or just in the entertainment industry in general who, based upon the circumstances and if it feels right and relevant, they will entertain a reasonably drafted NDA. So I don't know that there's like a across the board answer to this, because I've found in my experience that it really depends upon who the two parties are. Sometimes I do feel that independent filmmakers are a little too proprietary with their work in the beginning, and they feel like if they share it with anybody, then my idea is going to get stolen, my screenplay is going to get ripped off, and people are going to make bazillions of dollars, and I'm going to be left behind. And I just don't think that that's the reality of the industry. It's something that, as a writer, I had to deal with when I was first putting my work out there. And I know that that's difficult to overcome because you kind of hear those horror stories. But I just don't think in reality, and yes, it has happened, but it hasn't happened a lot. And I just don't think that that's, by and large, the reality of the industry. So in terms of thinking, like, before I send my script out to these 5 production companies, I need them all to sign an NDA. I definitely wouldn't take that approach. If there is a key collaborator that you're trying to match up with or talk to, and you feel like, you're you have something particularly enticing about the script or the plot point that you wouldn't want out, and before you like that DP or something, you want them to sign an NDA, I think the DP would sign the NDA in that circumstance. So it's really, you know, I think fact specific as to when they come into play. There's a place for them on every project. But there's, well, I shouldn't say every project. There's certainly a place for them in the industry, but I don't necessarily think that they're as necessary as some people think they are in the beginning stages. Erica, do you?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that completely, especially the concept of that there is a fear of having your ideas and your concepts stolen. I think where that stems is a lot of people wanting these NDAs, and that's not necessarily always going to be the case. And it is difficult to get production companies who have, you know, the experience to sign these, because there is like a level of, I guess, in a bit trust. And as long as you have your paper trail, you've copyrighted your script, you've shown that you're submitting to them, that should be hopefully your protection enough of their comfort that they're not going to steal your ideas or your script, because you've protected yourself already with copyright and you know, having that email, having that paper trail that they have access to your property.
Yeah, that's good to know. Let's move on to another question around copywriting. Let me see if I can pull this up. So this is from Aderonke Adeyemi. Should you copyright work under your LLC or your name?
I think it depends on who owns it. So if your LLC is your employer of record and you have a loan out company and they've already owned all your property, then it should be under your LLC. If you don't have that, if you're the copyright owner, then you can copyright under your name. I don't think it makes a difference in terms of protection. I don't know, Stacy, if you have another view.
No, I mean, I think that's exactly right. And then later, should you sell that project or that screenplay, you're going to assign it, the copyright, over to whoever's purchasing it, and they're going to record that assignment, and the chain of title will then move over to them as owner. So whoever you initially file it with is less important than you actually filing it and getting the protection.
Gotcha. Thank you. And then this is more of a creative question. Francesca Downs asks, as a screenwriter, is it a bad idea to write a character loosely based on someone you knew in real life? Is it best to avoid writing characters based on real people?
Yeah, I mean, that is also multi-layered.
Very fact specific.
Yeah, I mean, there is the ability to write loosely or use the composites of people in your life that, you know, you've created a new character because you've taken, you know, your best friend, and you've taken somebody you knew at 5th grade, and then you've taken like their sister and you made this new character. That, you know, there's levels to what you can do, and versus, you know, you knew somebody with this name, with this experience, with that exact like details, and you pop them into your movie. It's, you know, it also depends on like how you're showing them. Is it bad? Is it good? Is it like, is it wrong? Is it true or is it false? And you're just using this person. So that I think there's a lot of it to speak, you know, to be a lawyer, be like, it really depends on exactly what you're doing and how you're doing it and what you're basing it on. Is it your own experience or is it an article or just somebody else's experience that you used? So it's really dependent on, usually what we do is we have to look at everything, what you've done. We have annotation guides to the scripts, and we look at exactly what you've taken from where and make a judgment and determination at that level.
Yeah, that's right. And I think to answer the second half of the question, and this may be more creative than legal, but I mean, I don't necessarily think it's best to avoid writing characters based on real people. I mean, if you look at some of the most popular and exciting projects that have come out, even just in the last year, they're based on real people. So it's not about whether or not you should. It's just, how do you do it properly? You know, how do you do it where you make sure that you have the right releases in place, whether it's a life story rights agreement or just doing a little bit of research, is the person alive or deceased? And, that could play into it. So,
or public figure, not a public figure.
Exactly. So it does depend, and it is very fact specific. But if you have a story to tell and that story is burning inside you, don't let the fact that the person happens to be, a real person, kind of derail you from telling that story. There are ways to get it done. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be paying attention to those issues and locking them down, but it's certainly worth pursuing if that's a passionate story you want to tell.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. And then I'm going to pass over this one because I think we answered this earlier, but Juan Linares asked about if you have a micro budget, less than 500, can you still have an oral contract? But I think our earlier conversation, we made it clear that get that in writing, even if it's a very, very small budget. So get that in writing, no oral contracts. But we'll jump over to Mahendra. How should we think about a typical budget for legal as we get started? So what approach would you say for an indie film? How much should they carve out of their, crowdfunding or fundraising, whatever financing plans they have for legal needs?
Well, that's really difficult to answer without knowing a little bit more about the project, right? Because it really depends. Is this a $500,000, micro budget project? Is this a $2 million, and it's going to involve, it's going to be like a tier 1 project, so it depends upon, typically there's probably I have sort of a base rate for most projects, and Erica may too, but a lot of that final number depends upon that scope of services that Erica was referencing earlier, right? So if it's a two-hander and there are 2 leads, that's very different than if it's an all-star cast of like a Gary Marshall movie with 10 very highly recognizable faces whose lawyers and reps are gonna, you're gonna go back and forth 10 times on an agreement, right? That takes much more time and it's much more expensive. So that's going to factor into a quote or rate that we provide. So to say on this chat, oh, you should plan X amount, I think is extremely difficult. But that's why the conversations with the lawyers are so important, because we're not afraid to tell you once we know more information, we're happy to give quotes, email quotes or verbally provide a quote based upon the scope of service. So getting that information is not challenging. Just on here, without more information, it's hard to say, this is what it would be.
Yeah. I agree. I don't have to add any to that. She said perfectly.
Good to know. It looks like Clay from our team is answering some questions about documentary filming, about crowd releases. So we'll jump into a question about location. So this is from TW. Can I use the exterior of a building or strip mall as an establishing shot or B-roll without a location release? Is this considered public domain?
Erica, you want to take it or you want me to?
Yeah, we usually have exterior releases as well. And it also depends on the distinctiveness of the building itself and how much you're establishing or how long you're on that building. Are you establishing it as the city, or are you establishing that it's something's happening in that building? So that also varies on whether we recommend getting that cleared or not. Also, a lot of those stuff is, maybe it's a clip of something you acquired that has that establishing shot, then you get the clip license and that should cover you.
And then there's
I don't know if Stacy wanted to add something to that.
Oh yeah.
No, it depends upon how you, again, if it's just a quick, going down the street and you're not literally on the property, you're across the street and capturing it, then yeah, you're good to go. If it's something where you're literally camped up outside and you're establishing this as the hero's place of work and the inside might be totally different, you're going to want to get a release for that. So it's kind of just about using some common sense in terms of how prominent it is going to be in the actual film.
Or if there's a logo on the building, or if it's, a name building, then, and that shows very prominently, again, you may want to get that cleared as well, because then you're showing somebody's brand.
Gotcha. Liv Scott had a question about the chain of title. So we talked earlier about that there's an individual that is the contact for, all of this paperwork. If it's a collective, so I guess in a sense, a production company, is that okay as well instead of an individual for the chain of title to be linked to?
Yeah, that's more common, right? So
Okay.
generally you're going to set up the single purpose entity to
Mhm.
make the film, and they're going to own everything. And so that chain of title is going to be vested within that
Mhm.
LLC, that production company.
Mhm. Gotcha.
It's very rare that it's an individual unless it's like a short film or something that's really ultra
small.
low budget. Yeah. Anything of any size is going to have an LLC
Gotcha.
or something similar.
And then we'll jump down to Jack Smyer's question. Is there a standard for ownership of rights between the writer versus the production? I feel like the writer should, but does it depend?
I feel like the writer should think so too, but it doesn't. I mean, the production company is gonna own that screenplay at the end of the day. Now, are there going to be carved out rights, reserved rights? Sure. Is there going to be an ability for the writer to tie on to subsequent productions, meaning that if a sequel was made, that maybe they get the first opportunity to write it, or maybe they get passive royalty payments or something else? Absolutely. So there's ways when you're drafting and negotiating the contract to make sure that the writer is continuing to be involved. But I would say, in my experience, I mean, it's, the writer's going to hand over rights to the screenplay.
Yeah. At least the rights to make the film itself. Like at the very least, the production company needs the right to make this film that they're making and to deliver that to the distributor and have that film specifically exploited in any sort of ancillary rights with that specific film. So at the minimum, the production company is going to need that, and sometimes they do want more in order to make this film. That they may want sequel rights, they may want remake rights. And to Stacey's point is, in negotiating that as the writer, you may want to make sure that you're tied to the ability to be involved in that.
That's good to know. Liv Scott had a question that I also had myself. So if a screenplay changes, do you have to register it again with U.S. copyright? Can you just register the most recent draft, or should you continue to update that, or just register the final script?
It depends on what the changes are. If it was a one line of dialogue, no. If it was a character's name, no. If you created a whole new act, then yes. So it really just depends on the level of changes. Usually it's the first one that's copyrighted. Sometimes it's the shooting script at the end, depending on what level, where you're at with where you're going to copyright. But yeah, you don't have to register every little nuance. It's really when it becomes a new expression, something unique and something original, that you want to go ahead and do a new filing and reference what the changes are.
And if I could just add a little caveat to that, and not only is it not necessary, but you also don't want to do, I've had some people come to me and they've registered 5 drafts, and it's that could really kind of confuse, that can confuse chain of title. So, so I would just add that little caveat of, not only do you not have to, you shouldn't, be registering every single iteration of it.
Yeah, that's good to know. I'm glad. My instinct was to not do that, not go back to that site. Clay is also mentioning about music licensing for public release, all media worldwide in perpetuity. So that's something to keep in mind. Someone asked, let's move down to Jen White asked, are there any great books that cover all these bases? I have one from film school, but feeling it might be a bit out of date. Any other resources you might direct indie filmmakers to online or books? I know you don't need it in your everyday.
For clearances, I really like the Michael Donaldson's book on clearances. I forget what the title is, but Donaldson is his last name. Their firm is a big go-to firm for clearance issues and fair use issues. I think that's it lays it out very clearly for filmmakers of when you should get something cleared, when you should not. And I think they have a couple examples as well. I know some filmmakers have used that. You should still always ask attorney's advice though, because sometimes your specific situation doesn't really fit the bill. There's nuances involved there. So I don't think a book should be a replacement but they are a good source of, starting point, and maybe just getting familiar with the issues and then having, those conversations with your attorney of how that fits your own project.
Mm-hmm. There was a book, I can't remember the exact title. It's like the Pocket Guide to Indie Filmmaking or something like that, which I thought was a really useful layman's guide in terms of helping indie filmmakers just navigate a lot of the terminology and the contracts that are at play. I can't remember who the author is, but I think that was the title.
Gotcha. Thank you. James Basham has another creative question. What are the legal issues in using a celebrity's name or copy's name in dialogue? So just referencing a known entity, but not necessarily creating a character like that.
I mean, if it's non-derogatory and you're just referencing like, I saw so-and-so at the mall, that's fine. But if you're talking about them in a certain thing where I heard so-and-so did X, Y, and Z, and that's not true, and you've created sort of a factual thing around this person, we usually, it suggests to avoid things like that. But if you're just referencing off the cuff somebody's name and it's in a non-derogatory, non-factual, just like, again, like my example, then there's no issues with talking about people. It's what you talk about them is the issue. What you say about them is the issue.
In that sense, do you, because since you work on TV projects like Grace and Frankie, is that you working with S&P? Is S&P flagging that, or what if that specific issue comes up? Is that something handled first by standards and practices before?
Yeah. So usually there's a clear, like for a TV show, when there's a studio involved, they do have their own clearance manager that goes through the reports, does the script clearance reports. Sometimes we do, like, there's a company called Act One. They're very, they're used highly amongst TV shows and studios to do clearance reports. They will flag whatever might be an issue. Clearance manager usually is probably their first line of defense, because they'll either know like that's an issue or not. If there's a question, they'll bring it to me, and then that's where we go through the different fact patterns of like what's being used, how it's going to be used, what are the possible legal claims, if any, what's the risk involved, what's the insurance coverage if we go ahead and just do this. So usually it's really when it's like a gray area that I have to deal with it on those shows. Grace and Frankie is a good example because there's a lot of jokes and it's a comedy. Comedies always has a lot of clearance issues in that way, because whether it's derogatory or a joke could be a very fine line. So yeah, we have a lot of conversations on that show. So, but it's always, we always get it through, and we always have the writers there are great, and they know what they're doing. I mean, it's going into the 7th season, so they know the lay of the land at this point. Yeah.
No surprises there. Right. Well, Erica and Stacy, thank you so much for giving your time and your expertise to all of us in the Seed&Spark community. This has been so helpful. This is the closest I've gotten to law school, so I will be letting my mom know that I know a lot more than I did an hour ago. I want to thank Shay, running tech, Danny in the chat. We also shared that book that you referenced, Clearance and Copyright, and everyone for joining us. Hopefully this was really useful to you in making sure that you cover your bases, get everything in writing, and get that chain of title clear and defined when you head into your first or second or third film project. So thank you everyone for joining, and thank you Erica and Stacy.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it.
Bye. Have a good rest of your day, everyone.
Bye. You too.